Hello, I'm with Colin Yoshioka-Smith of Red Wizard. Colin, did I say
Nice
that
to
all
meet
right?
you. Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me. Go
I'm
on.
hoping to get to the bottom of the contribution that Red Wizard makes to this industry, but also your perspectives on this
Yeah.
topic that we're talking about now of inverting the hiring pyramid. But let me start, please, with just a quick, intro to who Red Wizard is as a business. What do you do?
Well, Red Wizard's been around for 10 years. Typically, we deal with very large global businesses in contingent labor. Where we've changed our business and where the world is changing openly, looking forward to another 10 years, is actually we're coming out of just focusing only in total talent. In only focus on contingent labor and moving into supporting businesses, particularly HR and procurement in total talent, which is definitely where the world wants to go. The challenges with that is regulation, obviously misclassification of workers, and things like that to get that balance right. But also fundamentally, we're really good at getting a business to understand its program, fill in any white space that it has, and enable it to be ready for total talent. Because let's be honest, I don't think a business out there is ready fully for the benefits of total talent workforce yet.
Yeah, and if I just ask the open question of, how do you see the
Cool.
talent industry today and the challenges of the industry? What's your read back on that?
Well, there's lots of answers I could give you, and we haven't got that much time. But the shortest possible answer I'd say is a lot of companies, if I take 5 steps back, don't do the fundamentals very well in contingent labor. So there's various reasons, right? HR, so my background's HR, right? Essentially, HR are not equipped or trained in contingent workers. We're trained in employees, people, their people functions, right? Procurement, who are typically in charge of contingent labor, which is always strange to me, but they're sort of lumbered with it. They don't want it openly. But the challenge being lumbered with this contingent labor that is almost a second-class citizen historically to a business, completely wrongly, by the way, they're very instrumental for a business, right? They don't understand the nuances and the impact that contingent labor have. What they see is, how can I save money and cut costs, right? So what you don't have is the best engaged suppliers getting value out of your suppliers, getting best cost-effective savings from a supplier, because that process can cost money if it's not done right, particularly high turnover rates. HR are not equipped, and it's that cohesion between departments. And the biggest one that's not developed is managers. Managers are ill-equipped to understand how they should be managing their team, whether they've got a couple of contractors on their team and a bunch of employees. They should not treat them the same, but actually they don't even know how they should be treating their workers properly. Actually, from a very HR perspective, they're not very trained very well in their people side of the business, let alone what makes a contingent worker different, or a temporary, or a contractor, or people on SOW, even more big complication that's coming out that's very popular. A lot of people want to go down the SOW route in their businesses, etc. Again, there's another layer of complexity around compliance and how they should manage those kind of workers. So it's all these different nuances that are not trained, not really understood. Companies don't sit there and take 5 steps back and map it out, and they just don't understand what good looks like. If they knew that, they would at least have a picture to go, well, we can work towards how to get there, right? They just haven't been given that vision, which is something Red Wizard are really passionate about, sort of giving to a business.
So, you said working towards a model. Is there a model? When you look at this kind of total talent management, is there a model out there?
So we have a framework called Concerto at Red Wizard. Concerto is the most comprehensive framework I've ever seen in 20 years of recruitment HR around contingent labor. But the challenge is there a framework that would suit everybody? The answer is no. And the honest answer is because there shouldn't be. Every company should be bespoke in its needs and its wants of total talent, or any workforce, regardless if it's a contractor or an employee, whatever it needs. So, and I put it to you like this: if you're a pharmaceutical business, manufacturing company, a construction business, your needs are going to be completely different to the next business. So one company wants to have a very, big strategy on how it can recruit from a diverse pool, or how it can bring skills up from apprenticeships, or different ways of bringing those skills that don't exist, or bringing people from abroad. I mean, although there are some politics around immigration and stuff like that, in reality there are needs to consider bringing skill sets from other countries, etc. So there are different programs and different needs. If you've got a good path from A to Z of where you get to in your whole business, from the lens of procurement, lens of your people function, from your tech's a big enabler that's important that people always forget about. Tech's something that will give you data and insight of how to do better at your program, right? So if you've got those three lenses with a good solid lens of governance, then what you've got is the framework to be as adaptable and changeable based on what your business needs, and that will be bespoke for every client, for every company, right? So as long as you've got those lenses and frameworks and bringing people around the table, that's the biggest thing that we do as a business, right? Most people in IT don't know what a contingent program does in its business, and there's a problem from a tech perspective. Same as HR don't know, procurement don't know there's a strategy. It's just, it cost me 100 million a year. Is that worthwhile? Am I spending too much money? So it's bringing people around the table to see each other's viewpoint that really drives all of that together.
Is the lack of ambition one of the biggest problems? The lack of, if you've got this vision, is it the lack of ambition to get to somewhere as a destination is the challenge?
I don't think it's a lack of ambition. Openly, let's come at this answer in a slightly different way from my lens, right? I think every business out there would love the ambition to be able to have a total talent workforce. Because let's be honest, I think the first couple of companies in every industry that does it correctly will probably have a competitive edge, competitive advantage, right? Let's be honest, financially, for a business to be able to have its workforce, an oiled machine, more effective in benefiting from total talent will be the most competitive in the market, right? Let's be transparent from a competitive commercial standpoint. But I think it's not the ambition to be competitive or anything like that. I think businesses are very operational that don't know how to approach it or how to go forward. If you think of a HR department, a typical HR director, right? They're probably sat in that role for 10, 15 years. What innovation are they bringing to that company to understand what's currently going on in the market? Whether that's from a tech lens, from any kind of lens in a program of some description, that they would understand what's best for their business. I would argue that unless they're spending their entire day, which a HR director wouldn't be, constantly market researching what's going out there, they probably wouldn't have that lens. So they're already a back foot to bring that to a business, number one. And can't blame them. They're in the doing role that is, I've got operationally something to do, and that's important. It doesn't mean they don't have the ambition to want to do it. They just haven't got the advice or guidance of how to approach it, what options they could bring to that table. And that is but one problem. But fundamentally, I go back to the beginning statement I made, which is genuinely, business do not actually have the basic foundations solid to be able to grow on sometimes. So I think there are some genuinely, we'll talk about the reversing the pyramid, and there are all sorts of really good ideas and great initiatives out there that businesses should be grabbing with both hands and doing as companies. And I think companies that don't take on initiatives like this are crazy, because I think they could be game changing for a company. If it's really beneficial for them, they should do it. But a lot of the problems I see is they're not built on foundations that are good, sort of blocks to really put a program like that together and be it successfully. I think that's the challenge I see.
Yeah, so picking up on that, when we've been attending conferences this year, we've seen that there's two major threads of conversation that seem to be happening an awful lot. One is around spend analytics and understanding how to be data driven. The other one is this concept of inverting the hiring pyramid, where we're really saying an employer brand has the potentially, depending on their brand, I suppose, to invert the hiring pyramid, and instead of actually going out to look for talent when you get a purchase order arrive on the desk, you can actually attract that talent, appeal to the talent to approach you earlier as a brand, and to get onboarded, and even perhaps to pre-flight and go through the onboarding exercise, just so that candidates can get to the front of the queue and have the promise of that opportunity for brands they want to work for. So that seems to be the nature of the conversation and the interest that organizations are kind of moving to. But Colin, let me start, if I just unpeel that a bit. What do you see what are your perspectives on that in terms of the opportunity, but also the challenges that people face?
Well, I'll start with the challenge openly. I've talked about talent pooling, which is another way of sort of
Yeah.
wording that, if you like. And talent pooling is something that's innately always talked about in recruitment. The challenge a business will always face is the fact that it's the investment of time and money without having that PO number to say, oh, well, that's tick that box and it's paid for that. It's very short-sighted of a business not to see the value in it. What they see is the pound note that goes from here to over here, and especially in contingent workforce, more so. Because if there's not a job requirement and a PO number, as you rightly point out, it's kind of like, well, why am I paying for that? That's a waste of time. And actually, building a pool that you can tap in and out of has huge amounts of cost-saving opportunities. One, the reaction time of filling jobs is massively beneficial for a business, because contingent workforce, let's be honest, at a drop of a hat, is the thing that an employee can't do, which is, I've got a skill to do a project now. I've just had this land on the desk. Can we do this? And the ability to be able to react that quickly actually goes back to competitive advantage. You could be at advantage of a competition because you can react quicker. Sadly, margins make a huge difference in a business. So I think reversing that's really important to be competitive, because everyone's impatient for everything now. And I think it's almost like an evolution of coming away from that. It takes time to get your skill that you need, that person that can deliver something, to actually, we have a pool of people that could instantly be able to deliver a solution for you. And that, again, is another benefit of contingent workforce. So I think there's huge benefits in looking at it like that.
Yeah, so there's kind of opportunities. There are challenges in getting to that. Have you seen this example? Talent pools. Have you seen organisations actually doing it successfully at all?
We actually talent pool in our organisation. So we have an associate network we use at Red Wizard. The reality is we want to be so agile for a business, and not a sales pitch, by the way, but it is just to be as agile as we can for any demand that comes to a business. We've got people that we know, tested, we trust, that we can literally drop off a hat, put into a project, right? There's some benefits of having that. So we're also, and I'm going to be honest with you, we're able to remain a nimble, quick, small company as a consultancy to be able to do that, so we can scale when we need to, and we can keep small. And that, again, is the kind of total talent approach on a very small scale, if you like, that gives us that sort of bandwidth to do that. It's kind of one of the strategies we employ. The other one is one of the clients is a large construction company, for example. In the construction sector, the ability to be able to talent pool different skill sets in certain regions for certain projects have a massive benefit for you to be able to go, right, I need X amount of people. Who are the suppliers that are talent pooling for us? Of our in-house team already negotiated with people what their rates are, what our anticipation, looking at future projects that are coming up, that you can literally tap, deal with things. And again, construction is one of those that is sometimes a 2-hour window. Can you fill a job in 2 hours? Well, the reality is, yes, we can, if you talent pool them the right way. But a lot of it comes down to, and I suppose where it goes right and wrong, candidate management is one. It's really important to have a honest, open expectation management. I may have a job for you, I may not, but this is what it's about. Two is actually giving them a real insight in terms of the brand, the business. Why do you want to be part of a pool of people that doesn't guarantee a job tomorrow, right? So for Red Wizard, it is about the fact we want to change the industry, we want to impact it, we really want to help businesses get towards that total talent, right?
Yeah, but do you think companies spend enough time thinking about their employer brand to do all of this? Because presumably you've got to appeal to the audience of candidates, right?
Absolutely. There's a term called CVP that's been thrown around the last few years, which is so it's an EVP, but for contingent workers, contractor value proposition. Throwing acronyms out there. It's a terrible habit. But I like the concept that people can create a bespoke value proposition for a contingent workforce, because I do think there is huge value in doing so openly. I don't know many companies that do this, though. It's the only thing. Again, the only challenge is that there's been a few companies that I've or terminologies used around like a total talent approach, like there's a benefit of regardless of your employee or not. I think that there's a grey area there. You've got to keep them. Again, if you think about misclassification, show that one's an employee, show one's a worker. But I do think you need to think about your brand, the benefits to anybody coming to the business, regardless of category.
In terms of the adoption of talent pools and this kind of migration to direct sourcing methods that people are now talking about, do you think it's better to have a partner that kind of guides you through this and sort of does all the backfilling of resources? I mean, I guess I'm struggling myself to see organizations that are already stretched in those departments to manage contingent workforce or manage HR are going to really have the capacity to do this.
I've got two examples of the two different options, right? So when you've got an in-house talent acquisition department, yes, they can talent pool when you do it internally, as long as you can budget that in your cost, your headcount, your budget from a time perspective, operationally, right? If you like, you're covered. When you come to an agency, the challenge is openly, there is a point of they're willing to help, but they want to make a fee, right? It goes back to the challenge, right? We have a partnership with a business called Tria Recruitment, great business, and actually with our partnership agreed that we would give them an incentive to help them in terms of time to talent pool, but not charge us a fee, right? Effectively. But what we're doing is we're utilizing their expertise, their time, because we're too small a business to do that ourselves openly. And there are ways in which if you partner with a business rather than treat a supplier like a recruitment agency, right? It's choosing a partner and partnering, right? In this way. But the benefit of working that collaboratively with somebody is they get us through and through. They know our business inside and out. We know them as a business. And the benefit of that is even though they're an external company, they're not an MSP, they're an external recruitment agency. But that relationship that we've got means that we can have an honest conversation with the business. They know our CVP, they know our EVP, they do our permanent hiring as well for us. But the reality is we like that relationship because they go through the details we wouldn't do internally. Also, our contractors, they're not working with us, they're still happy with us. They're actually protecting our brand and it's worth paying for.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about the traditional structure of the talent industry for contingent workforce at the moment, Colin. We've got MSPs, managed service providers, that are providing sort of management facilitation. We've got sort of VMS systems, and then we've got all the staffing companies themselves that are invested into these supply chains. What happens to MSPs and staffing organizations when you're doing this kind of direct sourcing approach more commonly? Where do they go with the market?
You've also got neutral vends, just to add an extra that are largely not neutral, just to put it out there, because they're owned often by a recruitment agency that happens to be on the PSL. Anyway, we won't go into politics for today, but it is a bit of a mess, if I'm honest. So historically, I understand, right? We go back to a big business that's very complex. You want a managed service provider because you want to get somebody else to do it. And I totally understand that approach. The problem is MSPs openly are transactional. It's not their fault. The clients are slightly to blame for this, but at the same time, they don't know any different. It's just the nature of an industry. And it's actually a nature of the recruitment industry. The recruitment industry has always been transactional. So to answer your question, the staffing agencies typically are feeding in to an MSP that's taking a fee off because they're taking their cut, means their suppliers have to do a job sometimes at a reduced rate. That's not always the case, but it sometimes happens because the MSP should be managing that process. Going back to direct sourcing often is a hybrid of two things. Either they've got direct sourcing capacity or capability in the MSP, which sometimes happens, or they're partnering with a section of their business. So sometimes you can have a company, I call it a fractured business, that could have direct sourcing and an MSP in the same business. And so what you could have is an overarching business like a neutral vend, or maybe their PMO function is the overarching in this case. That's quite common in large globals. They'll have a PMO team as well. But they'll have different fractured, I call it fractured because it's not great, but they'll have different sections of that recruitment based on their needs of their business. Often, again, might be split between white and blue collar type or light industrial, as VMS calls them, sections. So again, you might have a very white collar, very typically office based part of the business that's in one traditional, probably direct sourcing way. The MSP might only be dealing with, let's say, temporary labour, contingent labour, and then you've got a sort of so RPO is another thing that gets thrown around. So RPO typically dealing with permanent recruitment. So again, you might have one business that might have two different sections within it. So particularly a large global recruitment business would have RPO and MSP. Sorry to confuse you at this point. Hopefully that makes sense. But you've got different fractures depending on the business and the complexities of it.
Yeah. So in terms of, particularly for staffing vendors, what's the outlook for them if this does move to become a more common model?
So as complicated as I made that sound, and that was a simplified version, by the way, it's about as complex as companies don't want it to be openly. So the trend that I'm seeing is majority of businesses have the ambition, again, goes back to the ambition, right? And why it's slow is because of the capability, but the ambition is actually to come away from MSPs. In about 50 years, I'm going to put it out there now, I don't think MSPs will be as big as they are today. I think you'll have massive amounts of internal recruitment or internal sections. They'll probably be propped up by a outsourced governance model or a neutral vend, or a company like us going in, creating a solution where they can be self-sufficient and walking away, maybe creating a PMO function for them, or a talent acquisition compliance function, or that kind of, depending on the size, self-serving, that sort of area. If you go to, for example, the Middle East, for example, they don't use MSPs. They don't really understand the purpose of them. So you've got different, depending on where you are in the world, requirements of what that structure looks like.
And in terms of the candidate experience, I mean, you said that the industry is quite transactional in its psychology. Do you imagine that the outlook for candidates and their experience is going to get better if we go more to a direct sourcing model and talent pools?
Yes and no, for different reasons.
Right.
And how long's a piece of string? So the reason why, and I'm being brutally honest with you, I think there's always been a tendency, particularly more when people talk about AI and tech, right? So there's this lean towards tech reliance. Tech enablement is fantastic. The problem is when you use tech to a point where you take away the person interaction is where it becomes a challenge. So everyone always yearns to speak to a real person. AI won't replace that, sadly. If you can use any automation, is probably the correct term rather than AI. I think some machine learning might exist, but it's largely automation. Automation's a good one because it will allow people to understand where they are in the candidate journey, which is something that transparency is important. Okay. But the biggest challenge that's always been there is candidates getting feedback in it. I'm a big open advocate of giving feedback. Doesn't matter how hard it is. I luckily have a HR background, so having a difficult conversation is pretty normal for me. In HR listeners will understand what I'm talking about. But when you've got to give, I'm sorry, you've not been selected conversation, right? Most people resort to that auto email, which I think ruins a brand. It ruins the business. I think people that get rejected over a phone understand why the feedback is what they is. They come back to the process 2 years later and go, I've grown, I've learned more, I've got more skills now, I'm coming back to you. Can we go again? And you go, yes. That's someone's bought into your brand beyond the 12 other competitors that you're competing against because you had a phone call. And that's how important it is. So I think there will be some huge lifts and improvements in it because the cold email and or just not getting contacted has been rife for several decades. I think that will change with automation, but as long as the people element is still there, and I think that's what makes and break a brand openly.
Yeah. So, Colin, just two final questions. One is about the journey. So, if you've got, I guess a lot of people listening to this will either be in procurement, or they'll be in the contingent talent space, or they'll be in HR. But in most cases, I think it'd be fair to say they probably aren't inverting the hiring period at the moment. They're probably not fully exercising their employer brand. How does this start? Where does this begin?
And the easy answer is, what's important for your business, right, to achieve? And what don't you have? What's the white space? What's stopping you to achieve it, right? And if you can identify, or I think we've got a free maturity assessment coming out soon that people can go to our website and use if they wanted to, for example. But understanding that picture of where the white space is will enable you to start plugging gaps and understanding where your harmony is, how everything should come together, right? What you can then do is start thinking about, if you're going to implement any kind of program. I'll give you an example actually, which is about like looking at diverse recruitment is a great one. Lots of businesses are into this, right? But what they do is they start with the front end of it. I'll attract a charity or a recruitment agency. They'll get people in the process and they'll go, they're great. Can they start a job? They passed an interview. What they didn't do was educate a manager, think about their onboarding. How is this experience going to be different? How do we enable that person to be a success? So if you understand where your starting and end point is and plug any gaps in the middle before you start recruiting, what you're not doing is setting someone up to fail. It's the biggest problem people have with basic HR problem is onboarding, right? Because actually they don't understand what tools does this person need, what job are they actually doing, what access do they need. There's some real basic stuff that people don't do. What they do is they see shiny, glittery things and they run towards it because that's a great idea. What they don't want to do is the boring stuff, which is actually, let's just make a checklist of the stuff we need to do to ensure that's a success, and actually evaluating and reviewing it, going again, making improvements. So go back to your answer really, in a nutshell. How would you go about flipping that narrative of talent pooling and getting the right people in your business? Well, what do you want to talent pool? Why do you want to talent pool it? How important is it? Which ones do you want to focus on? If you're asking yourselves the right questions, you're going to set yourself up and start small. Start something small, do it really well, and then go again. Expand that out.
Where is the big obstacle for people to start considering this? Because I think, it's got to get onto the agenda first, hasn't it? So how does that happen? What's holding that back? Is it because people are thinking, they're used to doing what they do the way they do it, or is it something bigger than that?
I think it's something much bigger than that, openly. I think there's a case for everything you've said. All right, I'll know one person for every one of those, probably several for some of them, openly, right? Fear being one of them, habit, people like doing the same. Some people are just very self-sufficient, doing the worst thing in the world, using a spreadsheet, because that's what they're used to, right? It doesn't mean it's good for the business, doesn't mean they understand the risks associated with what their behaviors do, but that they're effective in their role and they get good feedback from that. So what people do is get praised by bad habits from a very holistic business perspective. So the biggest challenge is you've got to sit there as a business and go, what is the benefit of what we're doing? How can we make little improvements and how can we get everybody together? The first thing that a business could do, the most simplest thing, is get together, discuss in a big half day, invest half a day as the people function, the procurement function, your tech function, your governance, whoever's in charge of your PMO, get together for a half day and actually work out what each other does. It would be enlightening for your business. It's really funny, but so many people would go, well, I didn't know that happened, and you struggled with that. What was, just helping each other. The amount of hundreds of thousands that's wasted in a company by doing stuff that people just don't understand that didn't need to happen. And I always say, if you think of the smaller business, it's got small pains and problems, and the lack of cohesion, understanding of a business is small. The bigger the business, the bigger the problems get, and the more fractured it becomes. And there are companies that turn over billions that are wasting millions of pounds every year. Just inefficiency.
Colin, we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming on to the programme.
That's all right. Thank you for having me. No, it's been a pleasure.